Zeno, we're back.
We're back in the same setup. I'm loving this. It's so cool to be here in person with you.
It's so nice. If you didn't check out, last episode was about remote work, and in honor of that, we are in person on both sides. We're in the same room, and it's so nice to have it. But we're also so thankful that we can do it remote.
Yep.
Because we'll be back to that on the next episode.
Yeah.
But today, we want to talk about the beginning and how we started this podcast. Mm-hmm. We actually have it's a little bit of a milestone for us today. So we have now been at it for 3 months since we started recording our first episode. We have passed, I think, 1,200.
Yep. 1,200 downloads.
Actually, that's only listens, right? We have
YouTube
another,
too. Right?
Well, let's see. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's probably at least double.
Yeah.
For if you include YouTube as well. And we just passed 10 episodes that we published. So we're starting to get a feel for, was this a stupid idea to start a podcast or not? And we're feeling more in a rhythm, right? It was like a lot of work to start, but now we're able to make things more efficient, learn what's important, what's not. Yeah. And we've started to get some questions about, like, what is it like to start a podcast? How do you do it? What tools do you use? Like, how much time commitment is it? How do you decide, like, what to talk about, who to interview, all those things? So we kind of wanted to break down each of those in this podcast or in this episode, and just show what our thought process was, what we've used, and hopefully that can maybe be a help to someone else wanting to start a podcast.
Yeah, this episode is going to be how to start a tech podcast. Not necessarily a successful one. We don't know what a successful podcast looks like. We're still like starting like 1,000 downloads or 2,000 or whatever. It's actually like not that much. It's like a super small number still. Yep. But at the end of the day, like we are doing this not for those numbers, right? We're doing this to have meaningful conversations with interesting people. And I feel like that's probably a good way to start too, right? Like thinking about the motivation that you want to do all this. But you know, like I feel like the motivation is important for sure. And that's something that some people just start, and that's fine, right? And the motivation that you have for certain things, they eventually change. In the beginning could be something, later on could be something else. But one thing that always intrigues people too is like, okay, what is the tooling? What are the things that you use in order to record? What are the equipments, like lights and cameras and stuff? So let's talk about this, you know, let's start from there. Like tech equipment, and obviously that's not what determines if a podcast is going to be successful or not. This is just like the auxiliary things that you need to do in order to start, but I think it's important, right? Like equipment and setups and all that stuff. It's a really interesting topic. So what do we use to make this whole thing happen?
And one of the things about our podcast that dictates what we use is that it is a remote podcast. So Zeno, you and I don't live in the same city. Almost like 2 out of 3 episodes is interviewing someone who also doesn't live in the city. So we need software and tools that can allow us to do this on a weekly basis. We are creating this content, and we're not located in the same place. So maybe do you want to go over the tooling and I can go over equipment?
Let's do that. I love it. Okay, that's great. I feel like the best place to start is how you're going to record this. I had a podcast like many years ago, and I remember how difficult that was in the beginning. At first, we were like recording through Skype, and you're actually recording the stream of your conversation, which it's not good because like if the internet is not well, the connection is failing.
Yep.
Then you have those drops, which are terrible, right? You don't want to have those.
Yeah.
Eventually, we transitioned to like recording locally using QuickTime, but then we would have to like synchronize all the different tracks, and we would have to teach people how to record local on their machines too if we're doing interviews. So
sometimes they like make a mistake, they're not used to doing that, and
like how you record on Windows is different from how you record on Mac, which is different from how you record on Linux, and you have to adjust to all those things, right? Like maybe they click a different configuration and now you have a problem. So I'm glad that now there's like really good software, and that's all like browser based software too. It's not something that you have to necessarily install or download certain thing for a specific platform. You could just run that on Google Chrome or Firefox or anything. And I feel like there are two players that we looked into this when we start looking at how are we going to build software to record those conversations. And one was Zencastr. And the cool thing about Zencastr is that it allows us to, put all these people together in a room and start recording. And the other tool was Riverside. And those were the two different players that we were looking at. And the main characteristic about those was the fact that they recorded locally. So both the audio and the video, which is another thing that you have to decide when you're building a podcast, is do you want to be only audio or do you want to have a video stream too? We wanted both. So we needed a tool that could handle both of those things. And in the end, we ended up choosing Riverside. Do you remember why? Like, I feel like I was leaning towards the UI a little bit. That's just who I am. Like, I need a product that looks good, and they have dark mode. So how could I resist?
Dark mode always wins. Did Zencastr also record locally?
It did.
It did. Yeah, I'm trying to remember why. I feel like there was some sort of feature that drew us to...
They were still beta with the local recording when we at first looked at it.
We signed up for both and did demo recordings on both. And I remember it just going a lot smoother on Riverside. And I think it was also easy to bring people in.
That's true.
Like, it was a really seamless process for guests to be on. And just the whole interaction, because we don't want our guests to be thinking about like how they're going to record, we want them to be able to feel comfortable and just like talk about what they're passionate about and that kind of thing. That's true. And the video is super important too. So we had to decide early on, like, do we want to do video or not? And that's kind of a big commitment, because then we're like, we have to worry about the quality and that's why recording locally is so important for audio too, but for video, like, you have these huge, like 2 to 3 gigabyte files for each person. You have the quality of the webcam. So what do you do if someone like has a really bad looking setup and bad webcam? Like, what does that impact the quality of the episode and everything? You have editing, you have storing these bigger files. So there was a lot more work with that. But at the same time, we felt that for us, that was really important, because we liked watching along with listening. I felt like it was a way for us to get to know, for people to get to know us better and see us in like actual, like our faces, and also see the guests. And then my background was in like videography and film. So I like the idea of being able to interact with that again,
I think you have to look at what are the things that you already consume, right? That will tell you a lot about what is the style that you want to bring. We liked Joe Rogan, us too. Like, we knew that, we admired him as an interviewer, the way he can capture ideas and extract things from people. But then we couldn't afford doing what Joe Rogan did, right? With like the setup that he has, like being present in one city, and then having people fly over just to record with him. There's like a whole like logistics thing. Like, this is not our full-time job, right? We're doing this on the side whenever we have time. So you have to be realistic. and at the same time understand what are the things that draws your attention. And for us, we knew most of the podcasts that we were consuming had some sort of video attached to it. And that's not necessarily, the go-to format for everyone, but for us, it was. So we wanted to do something with that. And then once we have the video and we record it, what is cool about Riverside is that after the recording ends, the video was recorded locally, so then it's a matter of finishing the upload to the cloud. So then you have all your files already stored and backed up, which is great. That's another big challenge, right? Because now you start the editing process, and that's where you come in. This is the part that I step away a little bit, and I'm like, okay, Jonni, now it's up to you. And then you dive into like that editing process. So what are the tools that you use to edit? And I know it's like maybe a soft edit, like a light edit, but there's still some editing that needs to be done. So what do you use?
Yeah, so I use QuickTime, one, because I like that it's optimized for Mac, and I use Mac. I've used Premiere in the past, and one of the main... this time, I was using it as an excuse to use... I wanted to see QuickTime optimized for N1 too. So that was like the immediate thing. But I also didn't want a subscription. So QuickTime is like a one-time purchase. And so I didn't have to worry about, like, to maintain all these edits into the future, I always have to have a subscription with Adobe.
Oh, okay.
So this time I could do a one-time purchase, and then I have a lifetime of like a professional editing software.
So, but that's Premiere, right? Not QuickTime.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Correction. Final Cut.
Final Cut.
Yeah. So Final Cut.
Oh my gosh.
You were all over the place. So yeah, Premiere versus Final Cut.
Okay.
So I used Premiere, but Final Cut is what I went with for this one.
Okay.
And it was I had never used before, so there was like a pretty big learning curve for me to understand how the tool used. But all editing software is like, there's a lot of similarities. Yeah. And we also had to create like a theme for it, right? So we tried a lot of, like, we looked at other podcasts and how they did it. Like some podcasts will have like a live edit where they'll have someone editing while it's happening, and they'll switch between people. And so you're not like fitting everyone on the same screen. You're switching back and forth. But we didn't have this. Yeah. We don't have someone editing it live. We only edit after. So to decrease like the time that we need to spend on it, I created it in like a template for the episodes that are just us two, and then the episodes where we have a guest. And then I just bring them in, apply all the like masks and templates to it. And for the most, like 90% of the edit can be finished in 10 minutes, you know? And then you start going into like, okay, the intro, like how do you attach the intro to the rest of the clips? How do you make it smooth? Sometimes we make like small mistakes in the middle of the episode. Like we've had episodes where like our camera has stopped working, or we totally mess up like someone's name, or we start the episode and it's like just a terrible, like brutal intro, so we want to restart. So there's different things like that where we actually will like clip out, but that's pretty rare. For the most part, we just play all the way through, and then we have like a outro. So like since that was one of the things that was most time consuming for me at the beginning, I wanted to optimize to be able to reuse as much as possible every time. And then after we export, we needed a way to like collaborate and view the exports together. So I like upload everything to my iCloud drive so I can send over to you. That's probably just because I already had a personal like 2 terabytes or something with them. Otherwise we could totally use like Google Drive or something. And then we like both are listening. I'll send little snippets to you, and we can view like if I'm going to change the template or a theme.
I feel like this is an important piece of this whole journey too, right?
Yeah.
The fact that you have a co-host that you can collaborate it's pretty unique and it's pretty special because sometimes like if you're just doing that by yourself, you don't have like a reviewer, you're gonna make mistakes, silly mistakes, like we would like put the wrong name of the interviewer there, and we're like, oh my gosh, imagine if we publish that. But the fact that we have like the two of us, we can like each one correct what the other did. And that's cool. I feel like that's something that I would advise a lot. Like the first podcast that I had a co-host too, and that's a great way of balancing the work and distributing the work, because most of the times you're not necessarily making money with all this. It's like a passion project, it's a hobby. And the less work that you can do, the better, right? The more systems you can put in place, the more tools that you can put in place in order to maximize your output, the better. And
absolutely,
I feel like after you add it, then it comes the next part, which is okay, how are we going to produce this and publish it? So we also consider like different tools for this phase. We looked at Anchor, which is this new service from Spotify, which is great, right? Because you can publish over there. They already published to Spotify, and that's awesome.
Do they publish to other
platforms? I don't know. I would think they do.
Well, I can look it up.
But I'm not like 100% sure. Let's check it out.
I'm sure they probably do.
Yeah. Okay. And then we ended up using Transistor. And the reason why we decided Transistor was, I would say, two things. One is they had a really good product overall. They had analytics. They had like this option to publish in all these different places. They had a built-in website that you can just launch from your like dashboard, and then you don't have to necessarily create a whole new website. We bought a domain, ByteTalk podcast.com, and we just like changed the CNAME on your DNS server service. You just change that to point to Transistor. So that's great, right? You don't have to go over all that struggle. That was one piece. I personally also wanted to use that because it was made by like a bootstrap founder, and I wanted to support his work. And I was already seeing what he was doing. Like all the podcasts that I loved listening to, they were using Transistor. So like, and Indie Hackers is a big inspiration for me. I love listening to them, for example. And they were using Transistor. So it was like this thing where like you look at the different products, you evaluate them, but there are all these little nuances that makes you want to go with one versus the other, right? Sometimes it's dark mode. Other times it's like, who made it?
And there was a couple, not hiccups, but insights from that publishing phase. So we had decided to record 3 episodes prior to releasing. So then when we like made our big splash, we already had like multiple pieces of content, right?
And
wasn't just the intro.
And just to plug in this is important. Like I got that tip from Pat Flynn, which runs what is the name of his podcast? Oh my gosh, I forgot the name of his podcast, but he has like 2 or 3 podcasts even. So he was mentioning like to launch a podcast, it's always good to have that material in place, because if you're listening to something, you want to have like that first episode that people enjoy, but now they're craving for more, and if you don't have it, then you're
wait
just
like a week or a couple weeks for the next one.
So why not just like release 2 or 3 episodes right away, and then they have something to keep listening to. So that was cool.
And when we were like about to release, we had the episodes, we edited, we were like ready. Actually, one thing, this is like a silly thing that I didn't know before, but like how does podcast hosting work? So basically you have these, you need to host the actual
MP3 file,
MP3 file somewhere on some server, right? And then all these like podcast consumption locations, so like Spotify or Apple Podcasts or like dozens of others, right? they all just consume that original source.
Yep.
So you don't host your podcast on Apple Podcasts. You just subscribe to the RSS feed wherever that originates. So like Transistor is where we actually host the files and all the metadata, like the description and the title and release date and everything. And then we link all like Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all these others to there. And then when we post a new one, then it populates out to the others. So I didn't know that's how it worked. Like I thought you had to actually distribute the files to all these places, but actually it's like centrally.
At the end of the day, you're giving an XML file for those different podcast players.
Yep.
And it's not that they are necessarily playing the MP3 file that you put there. They probably like get that file, they replicate on their servers, they distribute it in a CDN, cache it, everything. And then like they're serving their own MP3s.
Yeah.
But they have like they would detect like the hash of the file, see when was the last modified, and then based on that they would download to their own servers. But they need a source of truth, and that source of truth is this RSS feed that like those podcast hosting platforms like Transistor, like Anchor, will provide you. So that's a pretty big time saver. And that's when this is the phase where we also prepare the show notes, like a little description about the podcast. Then there's if you're like looking at doing things with YouTube, you need to think about thumbnails. And I would say we do a pretty bad job over there. Like we
put
just
too much effort into this.
We just use the automatic one.
And
then there's the actual sharing part, right? Like you hit publish, boom. What do you do next? It's always good if you can have like some sort of social presence. So Twitter account, Instagram account, all those things. And we do have one. Like it's pretty small. We're still starting, right? Only 10 episodes, but we have like a central place where we can share news about the podcast. And there are different things that you can use in order to promote that episode. So you have like a 1 hour conversation, right? Like if you just publish like an image and that's it, maybe people are not going to be as engaged. One thing that we always wanted to do, we kind of played a little bit, but not as much, was with those tools that you can create like snippets and shortcuts, short clips of your videos. So one that is pretty good is called vid.io. That one is good. Let me look at the other ones because like those are some really good.
Because they'll even add like waveform animations and subtitles and to make it like more engaging. Because sometimes, especially if you're doing an audio only podcast, those snippets can seem dull sometimes because there's no like video to show for it. It's just like an audio file. So how do you like, do you post just an audio file on Twitter or something? So adding like subtitles or some sort of animation can make it a little bit more friendly for those.
Yeah, totally. And that's what like headliner.app, wave.co, they do, like they add those things. The one that I personally like the most is vid.io because it adds the subtitles, which is great because most of those like social media sites nowadays, they autoplay videos, but not with audio. So then like having that subtitle is a good way of like showing interest. Like people can like start reading it and then they're interesting, then they enable audio and then they can start gathering that. So that's pretty cool. And there's also besides show notes, you can also add a transcript of your podcast. And we looked into Trent.com, Odor.ai, and Descript.com. My favorite one is Descript. It's a really awesome service. You can even use that to edit like your video and like cut some of the things together. Crop was the word that I was looking for. So
just
you can
crop the things together.
You can crop certain things and like they would like detect those word fillers, and they would remove those things. So every that you have, those kinds of things, they can remove that. So it's a pretty nice service.
Yep.
But the interesting thing about that, we're talking about transcription services. We're talking about those headline kind of services, but we don't use them as often ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's something that is really interesting, right? We know the things that we should be doing, but we don't necessarily do all those things.
Yep.
And that comes to the point of what is the time commitment that you're going to have.
Yep.
Like we want to have everything in the best way possible.
Full production and like release and everything. Yeah, because we haven't made, any money from this.
Yeah.
We do this because like we want to hang out, we want to have a good time, we want to talk about these things. I mean, we wouldn't mind making things in the future, but that's not the reason we're going into this. And so because of that, we need to optimize as much as possible. And so we're always making this judgment of, is putting like an extra 2 to 4 hours into making clips or making a transcription going to increase. Right now it's like mostly increasing our joy in doing this. Now obviously we want to increase reach, we want to increase like the time of listening and all that, but we have to balance all those priorities. So until we can, we at the beginning it was a lot of investment, right? We're talking about what's the scope of the podcast? Like, okay, should we just talk about tech in general? Should we talk about only tooling? Should we talk about only like
productivity
or current events or whatever? Should we only be us?
Yeah.
Or should we be bringing people on? Okay, if we're going to bring people on, how do we find those people?
Yeah.
And the time spent like finding them, convincing them to join, coordinating calendar, giving them like all the needed info before, all that stuff is all time we have to spend, right? So we've tried to find the middle ground that we want to do. So like right now we do 2 episodes of interviews and then 1 just us. Partially that like gives us a little bit of variety, right? So there's certain work we have to do with interviews that's different, and there's certain work we have to do when it's just us. Yeah. And it just like breaks it up a little bit. But we've tried to optimize so that like the busy work that we have to do, like the logistics and the administration of running it, we try to shorten as much as possible so that maybe in the future we can create like snippets from our episodes, or we can make this into other forms of content. Like maybe we have a blog that we post the transcript to of the episodes or something like that. Yeah. But what is like from an actual number perspective, like what have you spent, I guess we can both share how much time at the very beginning and nowadays?
To be honest, I never track time of anything that I do. And I think I do that as a way to even protect my my commitment to a certain project. So I know that if I look at how much time I spend like writing a book and I see the ROI of that, I'll be like, oh, I'm never writing a book again. So that's the same way I feel about podcasting. Like if I look at how many hours I actually spend, I'm going to be maybe like too scared to even continue doing it. But I know that with every single project, you have to put more hours in the beginning. Eventually, you understand the cadence and you optimize for that cadence with like systems in place in order to make sure that you are not spending time like with repetitive tasks. So I don't have a number for you, but I know that you are better at tracking those things. So I want to see how much time you have to like invest. But I would say that we both agree that, okay, we have a job, we have our families, we have other side projects to take care of, and we have this. So it needs to be a way, we want this to work. If this was something that okay, we know that we're starting now, and we're gonna like, if there was a finish line, then we'll probably like run really fast and record 5 episodes every single week.
Yep.
But that's not the case.
Yep.
We want this to last as long as possible.
Yep.
But to last as long as possible, we have to be more conservative in our plans.
Yep.
I remember we had discussions about, oh, let's record twice a week.
Mm-hmm.
But then we're like, okay, can we sustain that pace?
Yeah.
And it was clear that we couldn't.
Yep.
So understanding each other and how is each other's agenda, it's really important, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to cut things and
Yep.
say, okay, we're not crossing this line. We're just doing this, and that's
Yep.
fine. You know, as
Yep.
long as you're doing, I think that's the end goal.
Yeah. And we've like adjusted that as we've gone, right? So like even we were shooting, or not shooting, but we were like exporting in 4K. And just that alone, it was like longer export times, longer upload times, more storage. So then it was more work needing to like move files around. And there was a point where we were thinking like, why? You know, like what's the benefit of this? Does anyone care?
Yeah.
I really doubt that anyone cares that it's in 4K rather than 1080p, you know?
Yeah.
So then, okay, let's move to that. And that's just a small thing, but it's made, you know, it's cut off, you know, 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there that we can use for other things or use for things that are more impactful.
What are some of those other things that nowadays are a struggle for you that you wanted to optimize? Is there
that are better now?
No, that you want it to be better in the future. That right now it takes you a long time.
The editing is getting close, but there's still like clunkiness to like how I'm importing and adding transitions and managing the media. And like I'm currently in the middle of like moving all my files around, but I've spent like 10 hours in the middle of that because I started moving and I had to learn how Final Cut handles like proxy media and aliases and all that stuff. So like that whole thing has been time, but I know that when I get through that, I'm going to be spending less time at the end, you know? So there's like those little investments of more time for long-term less time, you know? I think the research part has been something that I'm still learning how to not necessarily spend less time, but to spend time in the best way, you know, because research is so open-ended and knowing what information to have in our minds or like written down in our Notion pages before we go into an interview is really tough, you know? And we've gotten better at, I think, at knowing what like data points we can really use in the episode instead of just like what's available and just gather as much as possible. You know, we used to like gather a lot of data and then or information points and then kind of use that as like a hard script to like work through.
Yeah.
And now it's a little bit more free form, you know, as we've gotten more comfortable and figured out what we want to draw out and what we want to discuss.
Yeah, that was like a silly change, right? Where we had every single like talking point as a checkbox.
Yeah.
And then once we talked about that subject, we were like, during the interview, we were like, check, okay, we talked about this, okay, we covered that. And then we switched to like bullet points, which are such a small change, but it changed the format.
It's just inspiration now, you know, instead of like a
you can grab
itinerary.
that. Yeah, it's like a menu, right? You can pick one or you don't, and it's totally fine. For me, like what I'm struggling right now is like putting the show notes together because it's like 1 hour commitment, 1 hour and a half that I need to like listen everything, write everything, grab all the links. So that was something that if I could just like delegate would be amazing. But then you need that, like ideally like the whole operational side of things would be delegated, right? And
Yep.
we could focus only on recording, but that's not the case yet.
Yeah. We have to do everything.
Yeah.
The other thing that I guess we've learned is you don't how to measure the impact of like production value, you know? So, thinking like, okay, should we do video or not? Okay, we're going to do video. And like my struggle was, if I'm doing video, I'm like a video guy, you know? So I can, there's a lot I could invest in this, you know? A lot of equipment that we could change to make this better. A lot of editing that I could do. I could do like color grading. I could do like a lot of little edits to just like make it a little bit smoother, like better, you know, like templating and everything. But at the end of the day, I don't think that's going to bring value, you know? So like, I don't ever think about color grading. Okay, yeah, maybe it's like all the backgrounds are different and the like one person is like really warm, the other person is like very cold, but like that's okay. I don't think anyone cares about that, you know? That's my assumption. Same with like intros. We used to like write bios for everyone. We used to, you know, kind of stress about how are we wrote like an intro for every episode and that kind of thing. And then we realized like we started this to have a conversation. So let's just get back to the basics and not spend time, or even like not time, but mental capacity thinking about those details. And instead, let's just spend that on investing in the conversation and asking good questions and that kind of thing. So it's okay to, I think it's okay to say no. And even in talking with other people who are thinking about starting podcasts and like asking about these things, it's cool to see that they're like, I want to do this, but I know I have super limited time, you know? So my production value might be super low and I don't have a nice microphone and I don't have a nice camera and I don't have, you know, money to have this tool to do this or whatever. And I think that's okay. I think you can start anywhere.
Totally.
And you can always improve if you think that thing will be important to your audience. You know, better than going far beyond and wasting money or wasting time and then cutting back, you know. Thankfully we were able, like, we didn't invest a lot of the equipment we already had and everything. So we tried to stay within our means, but even that we've started to trim back because we think, let's focus on what's important.
Yeah, like you could spend 30 minutes with like the color grading, or you could spend 30 minutes with a title. And I would argue that it's much more valuable to spend time with the title because that's what people are going to be like using as a call to action to actually click and listen to the episode. And you know, like you have to really think about the ROI of different tasks if you want to keep like this side project running for a long time, right? If you, okay, I really care about this, I wanted to survive with the limited resources that I have. So if that's the case, I have to start saying no and maybe even like sacrificing my own quality bars, you know, like the things that you have that like, I have like certain quality bars in terms of marketing. Like the way we are promoting the clips and like how often we post on Twitter.
You want it to be at a certain level.
You know, I want it to be that way, but I just can't commit to tweeting every single day about this. So, okay, I just have to let it go. But let me get back to one thing that you said. You mentioned like having this Notion database. And I want to go over like the different lists that we have because I feel like that will give some insights to people about like how do you keep a knowledge base of the things that you have to work on. And this came all pretty natural to us, I would say. It's not like we looked at it.
It just like grew as we were like thinking about something. We just added and built
it was not like a template or anything. But we have one, we have like a full database for ideas and topics that we want to discuss. So one of the topics that we had over there was working from home, and we just recorded an episode about that.
Yep.
Because we had that topic over there. It's not like you are actively like going back to that list every single time, but having a place that you can always go back to and see, okay, what are some of the ideas that we had that we can pick up at any point in time and record about it.
Yep.
So I feel like that's a good one. Having like a place to add a title, notes, references, and things like that. I feel like that's important.
Yep.
Another one was the tooling, right? We were just talking about tooling here, and we talked about not only the tooling that we use right now, but also the tooling that we considered in the past.
Yeah.
Because
or are considering in
yeah,
the future.
or are considering for the future. So this is good. Like having that place is important because you can always go back there and reevaluate. Maybe
Yeah.
like Transistor is super expensive now. We might need to look at a competitor. Okay.
Yeah.
At least we have the list of things that we looked in the past. So for this tooling database that we have, it's mostly like the name of the service, the URL, and then if we're actively using that service right now or not. So I feel like that's a good one. Another one was just other podcast inspirations that we have.
Yeah.
So we already mentioned indie hackers here. I'm also extremely inspired by the Changelog, which I have been there twice. Founder's Journey, which is no longer alive, but I loved when it existed. Syntax FM from, oh my gosh, just forgot his name. Wes Boss. And then like you would have inspirations in terms of covers, in terms of names, content. So you can segregate those different inspirations too by those types of categories. I remember when we were working on our art cover for ByteTalk, we were looking at those things. When we were thinking about names, we looked at that database to see
like tons of names.
how we're gonna call it, right?
Yep.
Another one that is good is the finance side of things. Like there are certain things that you pay, there are other things that I pay, and we list all of those here. So I, for example, paid for the domain, ByteTalkPodcast.com. So we list there like who paid what. You paid for Riverside, and like every single month we are listing the things that we pay. Like we went to Envato, which is a marketplace, and we bought like a intro from there, and we put that together, added it a little bit, but we had to pay for that. The intro song from Audio Jungle, we had to pay for that. So it's nice to have a place where you list how much money you actually had to buy those services, because if you're doing that with a co-host, you can always go back, look, and okay, is this
have transparency?
Is this like equally? You don't want to end up in a situation where I pay for everything or you pay for everything, and now there's a discomfort between the two people.
I'm stuck with this.
Another thing was like this intro. Before we had like a super elaborate intro, we don't do that anymore, but this was a place where we listed everything. But the one that for me is like probably the most important one, and maybe that's because my role here too, I usually bring the guests to this podcast, and I need a place to list them, like all the people that I think are interesting. So I basically like have a table with different columns, like their names, their social media profiles, why we should have them, and what are they known for. So just to have a sense of like why I believe they are gonna like bring a nice topic, we're gonna have a nice conversation, but also like what other people recognize them for in the market. So that's a good way. And then we have columns for, okay, was this, did we contact this person already? Did they reject us? Did they accept it? Or like, what is the status of this relationship? And what is the temperature? Like, do I have a really big rapport with this person, and at any point in time I can just talk to them? They're gonna join. Okay, that's high temperature. Or I actually have no idea who they are. I never really talked to them, but I still really want to have them on the podcast. So then that's cold.
It might take more time
Yeah.
to get those ones, so we can kind of balance who we go after.
Yeah. And also, like, what is the kind of diversity that you want to have? If you're doing an interview-based podcast, do you only want to interview like famous people on Twitter with lots of followers, or do you want to balance that out?
Yeah.
Do you only want to interview only like white men, or do you want to have other people from other genders and other skin colors, because that's the diversity that you want to bring from other countries and ideas, right? So we try to do that. We obviously need to do a much better job in terms of diversity than what we're currently doing.
Yeah.
But at least that's in our minds, and we want to fix that as soon as possible.
Track
right?
that. Quick question. Part of our tracking is like we acknowledge their reach, right? So if it's someone who has 300,000 followers on Twitter compared to someone who has 300, that's potentially a bigger opportunity for us, right? Because maybe if they like retweet the episode, it's going to get more reach, right? So that's like a given. But so far, like, what's your take on if someone's like, I don't have that kind of network, you know, I can't just like walk up to someone who's super popular or has like amazing experience in the industry and get them on the podcast. Like, is there a direct correlation between Twitter followers and like great podcast episodes? You know, like, what's your take on that?
I would say that you would be surprised by how like people are willing to say yes to your invitation. We had like Jeff Atwood, you know, the guy created Stack Overflow. This is massive. And we sent him like a cold message, and he said yes. We recently sent to another super popular person, and that person said yes too. So you never really know. So I would say you have to shoot for those big people and hope for the best. But having someone that has a big reach doesn't necessarily translate into a good episode. So you need to have that balance and recognize that sometimes like a person can have like 5 followers, but you're going to have such a better conversation with them. They're going to be able to communicate ideas in a much better way than you ever imagined. And that super popular like person, it's going to repeat the same things that they already said in other places, and it's not going to be as engaging. So you never really know. So that's why I wouldn't optimize only for reach, but optimizing for like cool stories, a cool relationship, an open conversation. We recently had an episode with Pedro, and it was so nice. Like, he opened so many things about his personal life, and we got much deeper than we got with other episodes. That's amazing. But we only were able to do that because of that relationship that we kind of built during the episode. So it's tough. There's no formula that you can use.
And I mean, like, going back to our purpose, like, we want to have great conversations. So finding people that we actually connect with, we get a lot more out of that than just having like someone who has a big name and is super not cold or hot from like a previous relationship, but like cold or hot in the conversation, you know? And I don't think we have enough data to know like what is that after 100 episodes, and what's the reach and impact per episode, and if there was like if we were sponsored, what would that mean? I'm sure there's like way more we'll know if we get to that point. But at least so far, like, some of my favorite episodes and some of my favorite conversations have no correlation to like the amount of followers or if I knew them before or not. Like, it's really kind of broken some barriers in my mind of what makes a good like interview.
And those are like assumptions that we have, right? Like, we think that, it's really good to have popular people. And then as you start recording, you realize, no, actually, like some episodes, like some of the best episodes are going to be with people that you don't actually know. You're meeting them for the first time, and you're going to ask like really silly questions, really dumb questions.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes those silly questions is what gets you to that deeper level of connection, that if you only ask like what like that person is asked every single time, you wouldn't reach that level of connection. So that's interesting. And then just to close up, like the last database that we have is our equipment, our setup. So tell me about that. Like, what do we use? What is like all these things around us, and how they play out in our recording setup?
So we, like, on a high level, we are both running like Macs.
Mm-hmm.
So in general, you don't need this, but there is some benefit to having like consistent equipment between the two hosts, just so there's like consistency and whatnot, but you don't like need that. I mean, as we're recording here, it's easier to work with similar equipment. Like even pieces we're needing to mount, like we can borrow from other things and stuff like that. But we're using MacBooks where we have Blue microphones here.
The Blue Yeti, right?
Blue Yeti. We actually have different models, but both Blue Yeti, and then Blue arms, which both have been awesome. I mean, you can tell us how it sounds, but like they're really easy to like work with. The arms are really slick, and they don't draw too much attention to themselves and stuff.
Yeah, actually, I have a question about this, because when you buy those things, they come with like those table supports.
Yeah.
And that is good because the mic stands like right next to your face, and that's like the natural direction of your voice and your mouth.
Yep.
And that's good, right? But the problem with that is that they are sitting on your table, and that's the place that you're also typing and like touching all the time and bumping all every single time. So we ended up like moving to those boom arms for a reason, right? Like this actually like they help distribute that vibration and avoid like having those bumps be really clear, like release on your so
coming through.
Is there anything else to those boom arms like that you think are important?
It also just gives you more like flexibility. Like right now we were able to try out multiple setups because we could like move the arms into different places, right? So it gives you more options. It also allows you to keep the mic in the shot or out of the shot, depending on if you're doing video and if you want like the podcasty vibe of like like we're intentionally keeping it in the shot because we want that as part of our look. But you could do it in a way where it's not in the shot, and so it just gives you like a little bit more flexibility. But I think the main one is it helps with like the vibration and noise from touching your computer or touching your mouse and keyboard, like clicking and typing and that kind of thing. But yeah, overall they've been like great mics for us. There's like it's a whole rabbit hole of options and ones that could work, but I would say any sort of external mic that you can get is gonna already be a huge step up from using a default mic on like a webcam or computer.
And you have like different types of those mics too, right? Like we are using condenser mics, if I'm not mistaken, and they are USB based. So we like the way they operate and the way that energy is being transported to them is through USB. So the actual energy source is your computer, and that's how you power the mic. But there are other mics where you actually need to connect them with XLR cables, right? And you have to convert that XLR 2 USB.
Yep.
And
I like a preamp and everything. Yeah.
With a preamp, exactly. They need like a different power source.
Yep.
So that's more things that you need to set up.
Yep.
But having something is good, right? Something that is external.
Yep.
And
kind of like even just something that's dedicated for that usually. And I think that's the same thing for a camera too.
Yeah.
Because there's so much, like, again, there's a whole world of like options, and we both have DSLRs.
Yep.
That we use for like as a webcam basically. That we plug in through like Elgato Cam Link, and that takes the HDMI output of the camera and then converts it to like a signal that the computer can understand through USB. And so that's great, but even a webcam that you for like $50 could even get you further, just because it's dedicated and it's like that's what it's supposed to be,
That's true.
So I would say that you don't need to spend that much money. Like our setups, if you added it up, it's thousands of dollars, right?
Yeah.
But we don't need all of that. We chose because we're using it for other things and everything. So
that's the thing too, right? If you can like take advantage of that investment that you're gonna make, then use it for everything else, right? Like we already had DSLRs for our own webcams. We liked that. We wanted to make that upgrade. So then we thought, okay, that's cool. So now that I'm using, maybe I can buy better lenses, because I know it's going to be useful for both the podcast and for work. And just make it in a way that you can actually take full advantage of that setup if you're going to invest. So then just go for it.
Yep. And then lighting, if you're doing video, lighting is everything. It's way more important than your camera or your lens. So you can accomplish that naturally with window light and lamps and everything. But I would say the easiest way to do it is to get some sort of dedicated light. Okay. And we have also Elgato.
I think they're called key lights.
Key light, right? That's what they call them. And those are just like very, they're not like a super strong direct light like a lot of like lamps or ceiling lights would be. They're very soft and flat. And so you can put that anywhere on your desk to just shed light no matter what the room actually is like. And you'll be amazed how much that just makes a difference to have like dedicated lighting. But we didn't start with that. So you don't need that. And there's I've invested a lot, like for myself before the podcast, I put a lot into my desk setup. And when we were working remote, I like had my camera and I had my mic and everything. And I never had an external light. And I always got like tons of compliments about how nice the setup was. And that's just because I was using natural light. I was like by a window. The window wasn't behind me. It was near the front of me. So it was like my face was really shining through the camera, not like the back of my head and I'm all dark, you know? So just optimizing for your face, because that's what everyone is looking at. Just that alone is going to make a huge difference, regardless if you have an external light. And then like there's tons of like little desk things that we could talk about, but I don't think they're relevant to the actual equipment.
What are some of those things? Just curious what you're going to talk about. Like the stream decks kind of things? Like there's tons, like you can be controlling the whole podcast. You could be adding like sounds and visual things, or if you were sharing your screen, like some podcasts will have like a live view of a screen. And so as you're like talking about tools or like news articles or whatever, they're like looking that up and seeing it, so you can kind of follow along. And with that, usually they're using like some sort of deck to like switch back and forth between everything. You also just have like normal
like cable management and like things like that help you to not be distracted, help you to not even make noise on your desk, because it's like there's not like clutter and things like that, but it's all extra.
Yeah.
Bonus
like,
stuff.
Even like when you're setting up like cameras, like DSLRs, you need to configure for clean HDMI outputs.
Yeah.
So you don't have like an image full of like settings and information that you don't need.
Yeah.
But that's all like the little things that once you get that equipment, then you start understanding, how do I optimize that? How do I set up that?
Yeah.
And that's what Google is for, right?
Yeah,
to understand
that's right. if you have any questions, like you can totally DM. I guess I should.
Yeah.
Hello. I'm looking at the camera now, but you like definitely like DM us on Twitter or anything if you're starting this process and you're like curious about any of these setup like configurations or things like that. There's definitely been times that we wish we had someone to ask for some of these details. So
yeah, what like you mentioned like the microphones, like I have a Blue Yeti X, you have like a regular Blue Yeti, but we didn't talk about the cameras. Like what are the bodies, what are the lenses? Like those are things that I had no idea how to buy for. You helped me, and I know they're not crucial to do these kinds of things, but sometimes you just need like a guidance, like okay, what is the brand? Yeah, so can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, mine is the Canon R6.
Okay.
I used to have a 5D Mark III, but I got the R6 because it's a smaller body, it's mirrorless, and the biggest selling point was it had a flip around screen. So usually when we're recording, like I usually cover my own video up because I want to have like Notion and I have like a messaging with you, and so my screen gets pretty cluttered already, and so I sacrifice like my own feed to see you and the guests and everything. So the nice thing is that with the screen on the camera, I can always know like there's something happening behind me or like the camera shut off or there's some weird color or something all the time. That gives me kind of a backup view. And then I think I have the 28 to 70 lens, f2.8. And I think the only probably like good detail there is like you probably want a wider lens. So like you don't want something that's like more of a telephoto lens that's really zoomed in, because at your desk or probably where you're recording, it's going to be a really tight space, you know? So you want something that you can go a little bit more wide. And the lower that like F number, you know, usually like a decimal number, 2.8 or 4.0 is the lower the number, the more you can get that kind of nice blur in the background. So that's, and usually the more expensive the lens is too, the lower the number.
Yeah, I recently changed my camera. I used to have a Canon D3300, and I used to have like the same lenses that they came when I bought it. So I had no idea that you can actually switch lenses and like you have like different depths, effects that you can do. I obviously understood that concept and that mechanic, but I never really tried myself. So I bought a new camera body. That's the Sony Alpha 70D, I guess.
7C?
7C, yeah, 7C. You know how like I'm a super expert, right? I don't even know like the equipment that I use. And I got the Tamron 20 to 70 millimeters, if I'm not mistaken.
Maybe 28 to 70.
Yeah, I think that's it. I'm terrible at that. But that was good. Like it was a good price for the lens. I was like super surprised how expensive they were. Yeah. Especially like to get like a Sony lenses and all that. So I ended up getting just like another brand that I could attach. So it was a good deal. But obviously like those equipments, if people look it up, they are expensive, right? So we only were able to get it because we are in a country that it's easy to access those things. We have jobs that helps us pay that, and we are using for other things besides the podcast. If you're just investing for that, you have to really consider the investment.
It'd probably be like our suggestion would be like just don't worry about that at the beginning. Like focus more on just the content, because that's what people are gonna go away with. They're not gonna like stop listening because of your video is not like super super nice.
And the way we do our editing, like we are actually using extremely overkill equipment for the editing that we do. When we interview people, we have like this layout where we put like the interviewee like in a big way, and then we have like us like super small like like rectangles, like 300 by 300 or 200 by 200.
Super small.
So like we actually don't see anything. Like you have to like really justify the investment, and that's probably not what you should begin with. But if you have the budget and you really want to invest, those are some of the tips that we can give, right?
That's right.
What else, man? So you have the equipment, you have the people that you want to interview.
I think one challenge, like when we were starting, was trying to find like a scope for the podcast. Because it's a super saturated market, right? Everyone's starting a podcast now, and there's so many ways to do it. Like you can do interviews, you can do more of like a story or narration of some topic, where it's like a lot of editing, but you don't have to have as much like on the fly conversations. You can just ask questions. And there's even people that only leverage like live content, even more like a almost streaming, and then they might take certain segments of that and turn it into more of a podcast. There's people that start out like YouTube first and then put audio out later, or vice versa. So there's so many ways to go about it. You can go like, we don't do like anything on like LinkedIn, for example. But there's a whole space, there's a whole platform there that we could be putting content like this. So, I'm curious, how is that process for you of like, okay, we want to start a podcast, but like, what do we talk about? What format? What do we like? What is it going to look like?
Yeah, it's funny because with my first podcast that I had, it was called Zone of Front-Enders. So even with the title, like you are already segmenting the podcast just by looking at the title. So you knew that was only for front-end developers. And this is good. Like having a niche is really interesting, and it's a really good way of positioning your podcast, because you can own that niche and then you can grow out of it. And whereas if you go like really broad, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to own that niche. Like, how do you own technology? That's so impossible. Like, you have so many different players. So I believe what really worked for us was recognizing that we don't want to be as niched as we could be. And that it is a struggle, right? Because you naturally go niche. Like, my personal network is full of like front-end developers, so I naturally want to talk to those people. But I have to step out of that zone and recognize that I actually want to have all sorts of conversations. I want to have conversations with back-end developers. I want to have conversations with designers, with CEOs, with interns. And I don't want to talk necessarily about software only. I want to talk about IT, and I want to talk about hardware. I want to talk about remote work, which is completely unrelated to software as an industry. Like, you can do remote work with like absolutely any, not any profession, but most of the professions nowadays. So I feel like you have to really understand that, and you're gonna learn like your niche as you go. So you can understand that, I actually had a better time talking about this than this other thing.
Yep.
Okay, let's adjust to that and optimize for this scenario. And you don't have to be really like, okay, just focusing on one thing. You can be more open with your podcasting. Figure it out as you go.
Yeah. It was a little bit crippling at first, thinking of going general.
Yeah.
It was like, man, literally, like we could talk about anything, everything and nothing. Like it's so open ended, and I think that's where for us, like the interviews are so important, because that way we can really leverage like what those successful people are thinking about, what they're passionate about, what they're processing, and piggyback on that and have a conversation around it. And so that ends up being a way that we can go a little bit deeper into a variety of things that we don't have to generate ideas for.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, we have, like every third episode where we get to choose the topic.
Yeah.
And then we do research on that topic, and we know that we're passionate about that topic, and we actually have something we want to say about that, so we can kind of balance that. And that's been helpful to get past the kind of overwhelming, like, okay, we could talk about anything. Like you just log in and you have the mic on and like, okay, what are we going to talk about?
And there's this pressure of being really technical when you are doing a tech podcast. You naturally gravitate towards, I have like talking to the nitty gritty details, whereas I believe people are looking for is just like listening to interesting stories, like having a good time, and just like sharing that moment with them, right? Like right now you could be anywhere, but you decided to be here with us and listen to this conversation.
Yep.
So this is pretty unique. This is extremely special.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that this is a good time, and not something that by the end of this episode, people think, I just lost an hour of my day. Instead, it needs to be something that, this was so cool. I'm so energized about this. Like I'm more inspired. Now I want to go ahead and create my own thing,
Yeah.
And you don't have to go into the super nitty details in order to achieve that. You can be general, you can be broad. There's nothing wrong about that. You're actually going to be able to attract even more people by doing that and being more accessible. Like the latest episode, like you shared with your sister who doesn't work in this industry, and she had a good time listening to the episode.
Yeah.
So this is awesome. This is great, So the more we could do that, the better, I think.
Yeah. And we've even, like, that's been a pivot for us we started out, I think, feeling a burden to be really technical.
Yeah.
And noticing that part of our niche and like what we can bring to a technical, a primarily technical space is like maybe a little bit of like humanity and just uncovering the human experience inside of tech, So taking these people that are seems like commonly asked questions about their technical contribution and trying to draw out like what has their experience been, what is it like in their family or like living here or there or going through this life experience or whatever. And that's something like we care about in our personal lives. Like we like connecting with people and understanding who people are. And so it's been kind of fun to find a way to do that with a lot of times strangers, like these random people that are known for other things, and then we can kind of pull out or hopefully draw out things that maybe they don't often talk about in this kind of medium.
Yeah, that's totally true. And at the end of the day, like you have, like as you are starting a podcast, you have to find your own thing, right? There's no formula.
Yep.
There's no secret sauce. We definitely don't know what we are doing here. We're just experimenting. Yeah. We're definitely not successful stories and that we are saying, oh, you should follow this if you want to have X number of downloads. No, we're just like winging it and seeing what sticks and doing those small bets and seeing what pans out. So we'll see. Maybe if we record the same kind of episode, like 10 episodes later, it's going to be a different answer, right?
So, that's right.
You learn as you go.
Yeah. I think to close, I was listening to a Joe Rogan interview where he was sharing like the origin of the Joe Rogan podcast, and someone was asking him like, you know, what were you thinking when you started it? Like, why did you start? And he was walking through like, you know, he just like had a computer. He was still like fighting, you know, and he would like after fights, he would just like be with people hanging out and like, okay, let's just record a conversation, you know? And then he just started like doing that, you know, often. And at different times, like he had different opportunities with it, but for years, he never thought of it as a career. He never thought that like, oh, okay, well, if I just put in like, you know, 10 hours or 4 hours or whatever on this, then it's going to pay off in the future. He was just doing it because he enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And that, you know, eventually catapulted him to like basically one of the best, considered one of the best podcasts that's ever been. You know, he's like
for sure
up at the top, right? And so I guess to me, my takeaway from that is make sure to want the journey and to enjoy the journey instead of trying to make that be just a stepping stone to something else. And I think if that's there, then you're more likely to go through the long haul, you know, and for it to be more rewarding. Because right now there's no return for this right now. There's no return in like numbers or, you know, monetarily or anything. But there's a lot of return in just like enjoying the process and learning how to have a conversation with a stranger, you know, and learning like how to make people feel comfortable and learning like how to coordinate, like co-host and how to like share the load and share work and like so many things we're learning and also enjoying. So yeah, obviously. Do you have any?
Yeah, no, just I love what you said. Optimize for the journey and instead of optimizing for the end result.
Yeah,
I think you said it all. And yeah, I love this. I hope this episode was useful for those who are thinking about starting this.
Yeah.
And we would love to listen to your episodes.
Yeah.
Once they are out, I would love to like like see how it was and interact and
get a hold of us and send us over if you're starting a podcast now. We'd love to take a look. Thanks for listening to this episode of the ByteTalk podcast. You can subscribe to be notified of our weekly episodes. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, comment, and share with your friends. See you next week.